What does it take for a civilization to survive 5,000 years, not merely to last, but to keep recognizing itself across every flood, every conquest, every fallen capital, every change of script and shrine? That is the question this video slowly answers, dynasty by dynasty, story by story. We rebuild each century one frame at a time, training AI on bronze, silk fragment, surviving inscription, and a great deal of patient research. The Yellow River, late autumn, somewhere around 5,000 years ago. The water moves the color of weak tea, heavy with the Loess silt that gives this whole valley its life, and, when the river leaves its banks, also its grief. A small girl in a hemp tunic kneels at the edge of a millet field, brushing chaff from her palms. Behind her, a low village of rammed earth houses sends up a dozen thin trails of smoke. The pots cooling in the ash carry a pattern in red and black: spirals, fish, dancing figures. Archaeologists will one day call this culture Yangshao. The girl will never know the name. She just knows the smell of millet porridge and her grandmother's voice carrying across the field. This is where China begins. The villages spread, walls rise. By the 3rd millennium before our era, the Longshan culture is producing pottery so thin it sings under a fingernail, and keeping the earliest known records of grain, taxes, and disputes. Civilization, as the Chinese will define it, is already starting to look like itself. Ordered, watchful, deeply attentive to the river. Out of these roots emerges the Xia dynasty, half history, half memory. Tradition tells us its founder was a man called Yu, who spent 13 years taming a flood that had drowned the entire valley. He cut channels through hills, he redirected rivers, he passed his own front door 3 times without entering because the work was not finished. Chinese civilization begins, in its own telling, with a leader who solves an engineering problem. You will notice them solving engineering problems for the next 40 centuries. Around 1600 BCE, the Shang dynasty enters the archaeological record with full force. At their royal city near modern Anyang, the diviners burn questions into ox shoulder blades and turtle shells over a small bronze brazier. Will the harvest come in? Will the king's toothache pass? Is the queen carrying a son? The bone cracks, the cracks are red. And the questions, 3,000 years old, scratched in characters that are direct ancestors of the script a Beijing schoolchild writes today, survive us. We know what people worried about in the year 1300 before the Common Era. I still find that astonishing. The Shang are bronze masters. The largest single ritual vessel ever cast in the ancient world, the Simuvu cauldron, weighing more than 800 kilograms, is poured in this period. Chariots clatter through the Anyang streets. A social order of kings, nobles, craftsmen, farmers, and the unfree begins to harden into the template. The next 4,000 years will only refine. The Zhou come next, in 1046 BCE, and stay for almost 800 years. Their early kings rule by what they call the mandate of heaven, a moral contract under which a ruler reigns only as long as he is just. Lose virtue, lose the mandate, lose the throne. The idea sounds gentle. The mechanism is anything but. Every dynasty for the next 3 millennia will, in the end, be replaced when its successor decides the mandate has slipped. By 771 BCE, the Zhou king has fled east, and the kingdom fragments into dozens of feuding states. The chaos is, paradoxically, the greatest intellectual flowering in Chinese history. In a small state called Lu, in 551 BCE, a child is born who will be remembered as Kong-Chu, Confucius. He spends his life walking dusty roads from one prince's hall to the next, trying to persuade rulers that virtue and good order matter more than armies. He is by every measurable standard during his lifetime, a failure. Within 2 centuries of his passing, his teachings will become the operating system of the largest empire on earth. Imagine being the man whose ideas no court would buy in his lifetime, and whose words 2,000 years of officials would memorize. I wonder if he ever had any sense of it on a cold night in some empty inn. Around the same century, by tradition, an older librarian named Laozi grows tired of court life and rides his ox westward, never to be seen again. At a mountain pass, the gatekeeper begs him to leave one written record of his thinking before he disappears. Laozi sits down. He writes what becomes the Tao Te Ching, 5,000 quiet, riddling characters that will, alongside Confucius's hard, practical ethics, give Chinese culture its other lung. One half of the soul shaped by duty, the other half shaped by water. The 2 arguments will continue gently for the rest of the dynasties. In the autumn of 221 BCE, the chaos finally ends. A king named Zheng of the western state of Qin has spent 20 years dismantling his rivals one by one. He is 39, hard and impatient. He invents a new title for himself, Huangdi, the first emperor, combining the 2 most exalted words in his language. The implication is simple. He is not the next king. He is the first of a new species. He moves at terrifying speed. He standardizes the writing system so that a clerk in the Yangtze Valley can read a tax record from the high passes of Gansu. He standardizes weights, measures, axle widths, and coinage. He demolishes the walls between the former kingdoms and begins linking the northern fortifications into the long defensive line that will, after many later rebuilds, become the Great Wall. He carves a road network out of the country, and he begins his own tomb. Outside the modern city of Xi'an, a peasant in 1974 sinks a well shaft and strikes a clay head. The head belongs to a soldier. Behind that soldier stands another and another. By the time the archaeologists are finished, more than 8,000 life-sized figures, infantry, cavalry, archers, officers, have been brought into the light. Each face is individually modelled. No 2 are alike. They have stood in their pits, ranked and silent, for over 22 centuries. The first emperor's actual burial mound, just to the east, has never been opened. According to the historian Sima Qian, writing a generation later, it contains rivers of mercury flowing through a miniature map of the empire, set under a ceiling of pearls arranged as the night sky. Modern soil testing has detected anomalous mercury levels, exactly where Sima Qian said they would be. He silences the scholars who question him. He sends fleets east in search of the islands of immortality. He believes his line will last 10,000 generations. It lasts 15 years past his own end. His son is overthrown, the Qin collapse, and yet the thing he built, a single, centralized China, proves indestructible. Every empire that follows will inherit his administrative bones. The Han take the throne in 206 BCE and govern for 400 years, dressing Qin's iron skeleton in the soft robes of Confucian scholarship. The civil service exam is born here in embryo, and it will outlast every dynasty that ever sat the candidates. Quick aside, pause for 1 second. If you'd grown up in a Han village, would you have studied for the exams or stayed at the plough? No wrong answer. I'd love to read your honest one in the comments. Under the martial Emperor Wu, an envoy named Zhang Qian rides west in 139 BCE on a mission of pure curiosity. He is captured by steppe nomads. He spends a decade as their prisoner. He marries, has a son, escapes, and finally returns to the Han capital after 13 years on the road, carrying news of cities and horses and kingdoms his court had never imagined. The trade route his journey opens will, 2,000 years later, be called the Silk Road. Silk and porcelain move west, glass and gold and Buddhism move east. And at either end of the road, two empires the size of continents, Han China and Imperial Rome, quietly shape each other without ever meeting in person. In a hill outside modern Changsha in 1971, archaeologists open a Han tomb and find the body of a noblewoman, almost entirely preserved. Her skin still soft, her hair still in place, after more than 2,000 years sealed in damp clay and charcoal. We call her Lady Di. The contents of her last meal, including melon seeds, were still in her stomach when they found her. She was buried with paintings of the universe, lacquered chopsticks, silk garments so fine modern conservators are afraid to lift them. I have looked at the photographs for hours. There is a face on the other side of those centuries. The Han eventually fade. 3 centuries of fracture follow. From them rises the Tang in the 7th century. And if any Chinese era deserves the word golden, it is this one. The capital of Chang'an, near modern Xi'an, holds 2 million people inside its walls, making it the largest city on earth. Persian merchants, Sogdian dancers, Korean monks, and Japanese ambassadors share the same tea houses. The poet Li Bai writes Drunk Under the Moon. A woman named Wu Zetian, born to a timber merchant's family, climbs from concubine to empress consort to regent to, in the year 690, the only woman in Chinese history to take the imperial title in her own name. She rules for 15 years and is, by most modern accounts, very good at it. In the year 629, a young Buddhist monk named Xuanzang slips out of Chang'an against imperial orders and travels alone, by foot and by camel, all the way to India. He spends 17 years there, studies in the great monastery of Nalanda, and returns with hundreds of sutras strapped to a baggage train. The translations he supervises will shape East Asian Buddhism for the next 1,000 years. A few centuries on, his journey will be retold as a fantasy novel, Journey to the West, featuring a magical monkey named Sun Wukong, and Chinese children today still grow up with that monkey in their living rooms. In 751, Tang armies meet Arab forces at a river called the Talas, deep in Central Asia, and lose the battle. Among the captives taken back to Samarkand are Chinese papermakers. Within a generation, paper is being produced in Baghdad. Within 3 centuries, in Andalusia. The most consequential transfer of knowledge in medieval history travels along the chain of one lost battle. The Tang gives way to the Song in 960, and the Song quietly invents the modern world. Movable type, paper money, the magnetic compass adapted for navigation at sea, gunpowder formulas refined for use in war, mechanical clocks driven by water, including a 40-foot astronomical tower built in 1092 by an official named Su Song, which kept time to within 1 minute a day and is now considered a milestone in mechanical engineering. Iron production at a scale Europe will not match until the 18th century. The northern Song capital of Kaifeng has a population over 1 million. The city's restaurants stay open all night, and a surviving scroll painting from around 1100 along the river during Qing festival shows you the pavement traffic of a single afternoon in such precise detail that historians can still count the carts. The peace does not last. In 1271, a grandson of Genghis Khan named Kublai proclaims himself Emperor of China and founds the Yuan dynasty. The Mongol storm has already torn through Central Asia and the Islamic world. The long campaign reduces the Chinese population by something close to 1/3. But once Kublai sits on the throne, he governs with surprising sophistication, keeping Chinese officials, expanding the Grand Canal, and patronizing Buddhists, Taoists, and Confucians all at once. Into his court walks a young Venetian merchant named Marco Polo, who will spend 17 years in service and return to Europe with stories so extravagant his contemporaries assume he made them up. He had not. Kublai's new capital, Dadu, will eventually be renamed Beijing. The Yuan are themselves replaced in 1368 by a former peasant orphan and Buddhist novice named Zhou Xuanzang, founder of the Ming. His grandson, the Yongle Emperor, moves the capital north and begins the Forbidden City, over 9,000 rooms behind walls of vermilion lacquer, arranged so that the absolute distance between the emperor and any other human being is visible in the stones themselves. You can walk those courtyards today. The stones are real. The hush is older than any country reading this. In the same years, a Muslim eunuch admiral named Zheng commands 7 enormous fleets between 1405 and 1433. His flagship treasure ships dwarf anything Europe will float for another century. He sails to Sumatra, India, Arabia, and the eastern coast of Africa. He returns with giraffes for the imperial menagerie and tribute from 30 foreign courts. Then, with a change of court politics, the voyages end. The fleet is broken up. The records are partly suppressed. China turns inward at the precise moment Europe is preparing to turn outward. It is, I think, the most consequential decision no one ever wrote down. The Ming give way to the Qing in 1644, when Manchu armies sweep through a dynasty already crumbling under famine and revolt. The new rulers come from beyond the Great Wall, and they impose a single visible mark of submission on every Han Chinese man: the queue, a long shaved front braided back hairstyle that becomes obligatory under the heaviest possible penalty. For 250 years, every Han man in China wears the conqueror's hair. The braid is the dynasty made personal, every morning, in front of every mirror. Under the Kangxi Emperor and his grandson, the Qianlong Emperor, China reaches a population of perhaps 300 million, roughly 1 in 3 human beings on the planet. In a quiet villa in Beijing, a tubercular nobleman named Chao Shui-chin spends his last years writing what most Chinese readers still consider the greatest novel ever produced in their language. Dream of the Red Chamber, a long, melancholy meditation on family and decline, finished as the empire itself begins, almost imperceptibly, to drift. The drift becomes a fall. In 1842, after the First Opium War, British warships force open ports the Qing court had ruled with absolute confidence for 2 centuries. Hong Kong is ceded. Treaty ports are opened. Foreign troops loot and burn the old summer palace in 1860. The Taiping Uprising between 1850 and 1864 becomes the costliest civil conflict in human history, with 20 million lives lost. The Sino-Japanese War of 1894 brings the most painful blow of all: defeat by a country that had spent 1,000 years learning from China. In 1900, foreign armies march through the gates of Beijing. The Qing publish edicts. They send students abroad. They reorganize schools and armies. The reforms cannot close in 2 decades, a gap that has been widening for 100 years. In February 1912, in a quiet office of the Forbidden City, a 6-year-old boy named Puyi affixes the imperial seal to a document of abdication. 3,000 years of Chinese imperial rule end with a child's wax press on yellow paper. He keeps the title for a few more years, plays in the inner courts, and grows up to live one of the strangest lives of the 20th century. What follows is 40 years of agony, competing warlords, a fragile republic, the Japanese invasion that begins in Manchuria in 1931. The long civil war between nationalists and communists. Cities are lost. Cities are taken back. Millions are uprooted. On the 1st of October 1949, on the Tiananmen Gate that emperors had once passed under in slow procession, a man named Mao Zedong tells a crowd in the square below that the Chinese people have at last stood up. The People's Republic is declared. The next chapter, with all its triumphs and griefs, begins. 5,000 years, from painted pottery on the Yellow River to satellites in geostationary orbit. From oracle bones asking after the harvest to printing presses, then movable type, then the screen you are reading this on. From a girl brushing millet from her palms to cities of 30 million people. No other civilization has held its thread across so long a span, adapting, fracturing, reforming, and always, somehow, returning to the idea of itself. Every conqueror, Mongol, Manchu, became, in time, Chinese. The civilization absorbed what came at it and continued. The story is not finished. It was never going to be. That's where we'll leave it tonight. We're the small team behind Mystique History, and an arc this long takes a lot of careful stitching. So thank you for staying with us all the way to the end of the silk. Tell us in the comments which dynasty you'd most like to walk through in real depth. Tang Chang'an, Song Kaifeng, Ming Sea Roads, somewhere else entirely. We're listening. The work is still unfinished, the worlds are still calling. And the next one, we promise, will arrive shinier, slower, and a little nearer the bone.